Hello, hello. Isn't this a cool song? Hello. Hello, everybody. Hola, Gabriel. Hey, Big Boss. Atlin, thank you for the 32 months up. That's a long time. That is almost 3 years. That is almost as long as I've been gone. um, how is the audio level balance today? I tried to mess around with the settings. Hopefully my mic is like, significantly louder. Um, but I'm not sure if the music is also too loud. We'll see. I'll change it if people end up complaining. Let me see. Quiet? Okay. Today's the opposite, right? Let me see. If I turn... Okay, I made it a little louder. Well, I think also the song is quiet. This music. This acoustic story telling medieval, quasi-medieval sound. It's okay? So, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do today. And my mic's okay, right? It's not clipping. I try to make it as loud as possible without it clipping too much. Although if I raise my voice, it will start clipping, but we'll see. I won't be playing any crazy games like Fall Guys today, so hopefully not too much yelling. I did spend some time in WoW, checking out more. Well, first I bought the Midnight expansion, and then I spent like 2 hours looking around the neighborhood for the perfect plot to choose my house's location, and but other than that, I didn't do much. So could maybe do that. I could also read, because that used to be a thing I did. I've had this book for a while, and I've only made a super tiny dent in it. I made a literal dent in it. I actually had to glue the front section back in using book glue. But I thought, because when I read, what was it, The Lord of the Rings, I got through all, well, I think I didn't finish like the very last section of the third book, but I read the full Lord of the Rings on stream, so I feel like that was a really good way to get my reading time in and read the books I want to read. And I did want to read this one. I specifically bought this after I finished playing Outer Wilds, which, if you haven't played Outer Wilds, it is now my favorite game. But I looked up books that people would like or like recommend if you like that game, and well, I've only gotten through like a super small part of it, so I only know a tiny bit of what it's about so far. But I also have this. Not sure what I'm feeling, or if anybody has any preference. Maybe I should just read. I feel like maybe that's the vibe today. Saturday reading. I even got the right playlist going. Well, it's not really a playlist, it's just kind of auto-choosing, but book. Thank you, my one suggestion. I know what you would like. You hate World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft triggers you. Okay, maybe should I keep the I was thinking, if I read this book, should I have more like spacey music, or is this fine for reading? I feel like this is like acoustic video game soundtrack. It's probably gonna keep auto playing that kind of music. Also, I only decided to do reading today, so I didn't. Maybe I should set up like a special stream scene for reading where I can put the title and stuff, or like where I am in the book, and also remove that. Maybe I could just move that now. Yeah. All right. I guess I'm reading this then. So all the volumes are fine. My voice. I guess I'll just start at the beginning since I haven't gotten that far myself yet. I'll just start over for like the third time. Because I stopped, and then I restarted it on my own. So let me see. Where's the best place to read the kind of like synopsis of what this is about? Maybe just the back. So, hold on. Can't hear my voice. Are you sure the music's not too loud? Azernaya! At the beginning, what a wonderful place to be. Hello, good to see you. So yeah, the back of this book says, for 10 years, Fra Erasmus, a young avowed. Also, this, I feel like the music's getting loud. Let me turn it down a smidge. Yeah, I think it's just the song itself. All right. I was gonna say that this book takes place like kind of far into the future, or I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a completely different universe or whatever, reality altogether, but they do use the author like played around with language a lot and like defined their own words or used different meanings to both made up words and put different definitions to words. So for 10 years, Fra Erasmus, a young avowed, has lived in a cloistered sanctuary for mathematicians, scientists, and philosophers, protected from the corrupting influences of the outside world. But before the week is out, both the existence he abandoned and the one he embraced will stand poised on the brink of cataclysmic change, and Erasmus will become a major player in a drama that will determine the future of his world as he follows his destiny to the most inhospitable corners of the planet and beyond. So yeah, that's what we have in store for us. Can you guys hear that? I think so. I actually have extra thick windows, and I'm so surprised that you can still hear that. I normally don't hear the sirens anymore after I got like the second, whatever, the window treatment thingy, whatever. Okay. Wait, what was I was gonna do something. I think I was just gonna adjust the volume here. All right. Let me know if the music gets too loud, too quiet, whatever. Or was I gonna say something about the back? I don't think so. Okay. Yeah. There were actually a list of books that seemed interesting, kind of in the sci-fi. Oh, now I remember what I wanted to do. I need to change my category because I'm not playing WoW. Let me see. Edit. Would this be just chatting? I know the categories changed a bit. There's like an ASMR one, right? I don't think reading counts as ASMR because I'm not. Maybe I'll just do just chatting, and then do I need to set my tags each stream? Because it didn't save my ones from last time. Let's see. Cozy. Cozy sci-fi reading. Anathem. Should I put the author's name? Stephenson? Reading. Books. Sci-fi. All right, I think that should be good. Okay, and maybe for next stream, I'll find like some cool cozy space playlist instead. All right, so Anathem, here we go. Part 1, Provenor. Which I think is like some event in this society. There's like a bunch of extra notes also that they have, are like definitions of words, but I think I'll just skip them for now. I'll just go straight to the reading. Okay. Do your neighbors burn one another alive? Was how Fra Orlo began his conversation with Artisan Fleck. Embarrassment befell me. Embarrassment is something I can feel in my flesh, like a handful of sun-warmed mud clapped on my head. Do your shamans walk around on stilts? Fra Orlo asked, reading from a leaf that, judging by its brownness, was at least 5 centuries old. Then he looked up and added helpfully, "You might call them pastors or witch doctors." The embarrassment had turned runny. It was horrifying my scalp along a spreading frontier. When a child gets sick, do you pray? Sacrifice to a painted stick? Or blame it on an old lady? Now it was sheeting warm down my face, clogging my ears and sanding my eyes. I could barely hear Fra Orlo's question. Do you fancy you will see your dead dogs and cats in some sort of afterlife? Orlo had asked me along to serve as amanuensis. It was an impressive word. So I'd said, yes. And I do know what this word means now because my first time reading it, I looked it up, and it means like a scribe, in case you don't know. Because I didn't know. He had heard that an artisan from Extramuros had been allowed into the new library to fix a rotted rafter that we could not reach with our ladders. It had only just been noticed, and we didn't have time to erect proper scaffolding before Appert, which I think I think that's a different event? I don't know. They didn't explain it yet. Also, I tried to rebind the pages that were falling out, but it seems that I have failed because it is coming out again. Hopefully it's just that front section, because I swear as I was reading more and more pages, each page started falling out. So I will try to hold this carefully. Try to fix it later. Erect proper scaffolding before Appert. Orlo meant to interview that artisan, and he wanted me to write down what happened. Through drizzly eyes, I looked at the leaf in front of me. It was as blank as my brain. I was failing. But it was more important to take notes of what the artisan said. So far, nothing. When the interview had begun, he had been dragging an insufficiently sharp thing over a flat rock. Now he was just staring at Orlo. Has anyone you know ever been ritually mutilated because they were seen reading a book? Hi, Soviet. Well, I'm a Korean fan who used to watch YouTube videos from time to time. Glad you return. Oh, thank you. I'm actually half Korean. Thanks for coming from YouTube. I appreciate it. I'm reading Anathem right now. I just started. Has anyone... Okay, so this is Orlo. the person he's scribing for, asking embarrassing questions. Has anyone you know ever been ritually mutilated because they were seen reading a book? Artisan Fleck closed his mouth for the first time in quite a while. I could tell that the next time he opened it, he'd have something to say. I scratched at the edge of the leaf just to prove that my quill had not dried up. Fra Orlo had gone quiet and was looking at the artisan as if he were a newfound nebula in the eyepiece of a telescope. Artisan Fleck asked, "Why don't you just spiel in?" "Spiel in," Fra Orlo repeated to me a few times as I was writing it down. I spoke in bursts because I was trying to write and talk at the same time. When I came, that is, before I was collected, they, had a thing called a spielie. We didn't say spiel in, we said cruise the spielie. Out of consideration for the artisan, I chose to speak in flukish, and so the staggering drunk of a sentence only sounded half as bad as if I'd said it in Orth. It was a sort of moving picture, Orlo guessed. He looked to the artisan and switched to flukish. I don't know how to pronounce that. You know what? I'm gonna look it up because I don't want to. I dislike mispronouncing words, even though it's like a made-up thing for this book. Fictional language, blah blah blah. Flukish, rhyming with bookish. Flukish. All right, I said it right. Just a flukish. He looked jealous and switched. We have guessed that to spiel in means to partake in some moving picture praxis, what you would call technology, that prevails out there. Moving picture. That's a funny way to say it, said the artisan. He stared out a window, as if it were a spielie, showing a historical documentary. Waifunomics! Hey, thank you for the Prime sub. Thank you so much. And welcome. I had no idea I'd sub this long. 9 months. You'd have a baby by now. Thank you. Moving picture. That's a funny way to say it, said the artisan. He stared out a window, as if it were a spielie showing a historical documentary. He quivered with a silent laugh. It is Praxic Orth, and so it sounds quaint to your ears, Fra Orlo admitted. Why don't you just call it by its real name? Spieling in? Yeah. Because when Fra Erasmus, that's the narrator. For baby, please? No one can deal with my shaggy sound. Because when Fra Erasmus, that's the narrator, me, my voice, here, came into the math 10 years ago, it was called cruising the spielie. And when I came in almost 30 years ago, we called it Farspark. The Avout, who live on the other side of yonder wall, who celebrate Appert only once every 100 years, would know it by some other name. I would not be able to talk to them. Artisan Fleck had not taken in a word after Farspark. Farspark is completely different, he said. You can't watch Farspark content on a spielie. You'd have to upconvert it and reparse the format. Fra Orlo was as bored by that as the artisan was by the talk of the hundreders, and so conversation thudded to a stop long enough for me to scratch it down. My embarrassment had gone away without my noticing it, as with hiccups. Artisan Fleck, believing that the conversation was finally over, turned to look at the scaffolding that his men had erected beneath the bad rafter. To answer your question, Fra Orlo began. What question? The one you posed just a minute ago. If I want to know what things are like extramuros, why don't I just spiel in? Oh, said the artisan, a little confounded by the length of Fra Orlo's attention span. I suffer from attention surplus disorder, Fra Orlo liked to say, as if it were funny. I highlighted that because I thought that was funny. Attention surplus disorder. Just the phrasing of that. Should I just read or should I like? I know I'll just give my commentary because I had highlighted some stuff too because I thought it was an interesting concept. And I mean, this exists in like what more like traditional or what groups of people that like to be more conservative, and it's for the sake of consistency because he was saying how he's talking like with the more modern person from outside their like monk sanctuary sheltered cloister, where they use like the original words and they're like, oh, why don't you just call it by the new name? And he was saying how if they constantly changed with whatever terms were used, that no one would be able to communicate with each other because the terms just keep changing every so often. Blah, blah, blah. Tension, surplus, swear. First of all, Fra Orlo said, we don't have a Speely device. Speely device? Waving his hand, as if this would dispel clouds of linguistic confusion, Orlo said. Or whatever artifact you use to spiel in. If you have an old Farspark resonator, I could bring you a down converter that's been sitting in my junk pile. We don't have a Farspark resonator either, said Fra Orlo. Why don't you just buy one? This gave Orlo pause. I could sense a new set of embarrassing questions stacking up in his mind. Do you believe that we have money? That the reason we are protected by the secular power is because we are sitting on a treasure hoard? That our millenarians know how to convert base metals to gold? But Fra Orlo mastered the urge. Living as we do under the Cartesian discipline, our only media are chalk, ink, and stone, he said. But there is another reason, too. Yeah? What is it? Demanded Artisan Fleck, very provoked by Fra Orlo's freakish habit of announcing what he was about to say instead of just coming out and saying it. It's hard to explain, but for me, just aiming a Speely input device, or a Farspark chamber, or whatever you call it, a Speely captor, at something doesn't collect what is meaningful to me. I need someone to gather it in with all their senses and mix it round in their head and make it over into words. Words, the artisan echoed, and then aimed sharp looks around the library. Tomorrow, Quinn's coming instead of me, he announced, then added, a little bit defensively, I have to counter-strafe the new Clan X recompensators. The fan-out tree's starting to look a bit clumpy, if you ask me. I have no idea what that means, Orlo marveled. Never mind. You ask him all your questions. He's got the gift of gab. And for the third time in as many minutes, the artisan looked at the screen of his G-Jaw. We'd insisted he shut down all of its communications functions, but it still served as a pocket watch. He didn't seem to realize that in plain sight out the window was a clock 500 feet high. I put a full stop at the end of the sentence and aimed my face at a bookshelf because I was afraid that I might look amused. There was something in the way he'd said, Quinn's coming instead of me, that made it seem he just decided it on the spot. Fra Orlo had probably caught it too. If I made the mistake of looking at him, I would laugh, and he wouldn't. The clock began chiming Provenor. That's me, I said. Then I added, for the benefit of the artisan, apologies, I must go wind the clock. I was wondering, he began. He reached into his toolbox and took out a poly bag, blew off sawdust, undid its seal, which was a type I had never seen before, and withdrew a silver tube the size of his finger. Then he looked at Fra Orlo, hopefully. I don't know what that is, and I don't understand what you want, said Fra Orlo. A Speely captor. Ah, you have heard about Provenor. And as long as you are here, you'd like to view it and make a moving picture? The artisan nodded. That will be acceptable, provided you stand where you are told. Don't turn it on. Fra Orlo raised his hands and got ready to avert his gaze. The Warden Fregulant will hear of it. She'll make me do penance. I'll send you to the Ida. I'll send you to the Ida. They'll show you where to go. And more in this vein, for the discipline was made up of many rules, and we had already made a muddle of them in Artisan Fleck's mind by allowing him to venture into the Decenarian math. I'd been using my sphere as a stool. Oh my god, my book is falling apart! I'd been using my sphere as a stool. I traced counterclockwise circles on it with my fingertips, and it shrank until I could palm it. My bolt had shifted while I had been sitting. I pulled it up and yanked the pleats straight as I careered around tables, chairs, globes, and slow-moving frogs. I passed under a stone arch into the scriptorium. The place smelled richly of ink. Maybe it was because an ancient Fra and his two fids were copying out books there. But I wondered how long it would take to stop smelling that way if no one ever used it at all. A lot of ink had been spent there, and the wet smell of it must be deep into everything. At the other end, a small doorway led to the old library, which was one of the original buildings that stood right on the cloister. Its stone floor, 2,300 years older than that of the new library, was so smooth under the soles of my feet that I could scarcely feel it. I could have found my way with my eyes closed by letting my feet read the memory worn into it by those gone before. The cloister was a roofed gallery around the perimeter of a rectangular garden. On the inner side, nothing separated it from the weather except the row of columns that held up its roof. On the other side, it was bounded by a wall, openings in which gave way to buildings such as the old library, the refectory, and various chalk halls. Every object I passed, the carven bookcase ends, the stones locked together to make the floor, the frames of the windows, the forged hinges of the doors, and the handmade nails that fastened them to the wood, the capitals of the columns that surrounded the cloister, the paths and beds of the garden itself. Every one had been made in a particular form by a clever person a long time ago. Some of them, such as the doors of the old library, had consumed the whole lifetimes of those who had wrought them. Others looked as though they'd been tossed off in an idle afternoon, but with such upsight that they had been cherished for hundreds of thousands of years. Some were founded on pure, simple geometry. Others reveled in complication, and it was a sort of riddle whether there was any rule governing their forms. Still others were depictions of actual people who had lived and thought interesting things at one time or another, or, barring that, of general types. The Dale later, the physiologer, the burger, and the swine. If someone had asked, I might have been able to explain a quarter of them. One day, I'd be able to explain them all. Sunlight crashed into the cloister garden, where grass and gravel paths were interwoven among stands of herbs, shrubs, and the occasional tree. I reached back over my shoulder, caught the selvage end of my bolt, and drew it up over my head. I tugged down on the half of the bolt that hung below my cord, so that its fraying edge swept the ground and covered my feet. I thrust my hands together in the folds of my waist, just above the cord, and stepped out onto the grass. This was pale green and prickly, as the weather had been hot. As I came out into the open, I looked to the south dial of the clock. 10 minutes to go. Fra Leo, I said, I do not think that slashberry is among the 164, meaning the list of plants that were allowed to be cultivated under the second new revised book of discipline. Leo was stockier than I. When younger, he had been chubby, but now he was just solid. On a patch of disturbed earth in the shade of an apple tree, he was squatting, hypnotized by the dirt. He had wrapped the selvage end of his bolt around his waist and between his thighs in the basic modesty knot. The remainder he had rolled up into a tight cylinder, which he had tied at each end with his cord and then slung diagonally on his back, like a bedroll. He had invented this wrap. No one else had followed his lead. I had to admit that it looked comfortable, if stupid, on a warm day. His bottom was 10 inches off the ground. He had made his sphere about the size of his head and was balancing on it. Fra Leo, I said again, but Leo had a funny mind that sometimes did not respond to words. A slashberry cane arched across my path. I found a few thornless inches, closed my hand around it, jerked it up by its roots, and swung it round until the tiny flowers at its tip grazed Fra Leo's stubbly scalp. Thistlehead, I said at the same moment. Leo tumbled backward as if I'd smacked him with a quarterstaff. His feet flew up and spun back to find purchase on the roots of the apple tree. He stood, knees bent, chin tucked, spine straight, pieces of dirt trickling down from his sweaty back. His spear rolled away and lodged in a pile of uprooted weeds. Did you hear me? Slashberry is not one of the 164. True. Oh wait, sorry, wrong person. Did you hear me? This is Frolio. Slashberry is not one of the 164 true, but neither is it one of the 11. So it's not like I have to burn it on sight and put it down in the chronicle. It can wait. Wait for what? What are you doing? He pointed at the dirt. I stooped and looked. Many would not have taken such a risk. Hooded, I could not see Fra Leo in my peripheral vision. It was believed you should always keep Leo in the corner of your eye because you never knew when he might commence wrestling. I had endured more than my share of headlocks, chokeholds, takedowns, and pins at Leo's hands, as well as large abrasions from brushes with his scalp. But I knew that he would not attack me now because I was showing respect for something that he thought was fascinating. Leo and I had been collected 10 years ago, at the age of 8, as part of a crop of boys and girls numbering 32. For our first couple of years, we had watched a team of 4 bigger Fras wind the clock each day. A team of 8 Surs rang the bells. Later, he and I had been chosen, along with 2 other relatively large boys, to form the next clock-winding team. Likewise, 8 girls had been chosen from our crop to learn the art of ringing the bells, which required less strength but was more arduous in some ways, because some of the changes went on for hours and required unbroken concentration. For more than 7 years now, my team had wound the clock each day, except when Fra Leo forgot, and 3 of us had to do it. He'd forgotten 2 weeks ago, and Sor Tristanus, the warden regulant, had sentenced him to do penance in the form of weeding the herb beds during the hottest time of the year. 8 minutes to go. But nagging Leo about the time wouldn't get me anywhere. I had to go through and out the other side of whatever it was that he wanted to talk about. Ants, I said. Then, knowing Leo, I corrected myself. Ant Vlor? I could hear him smiling. 2 colors of ants, Fra Raz. They're having a war. I regret to say I caused it. He nudged a pile of uprooted slashberry canes. Roy! Hey, how are you? Welcome to my reading stream. I'm reading Anathem. This is a sci-fi book. It updated the title, right? Alright. Obviously I'll stay on Instagram. No, I'll do it next time. I was still too nervous. I feel like this is a second warm-up stream before I announce it. Great time listening while running Vampire Survivors. Wait, do I know that game? What vampire? Wait, no, there's a different vampire game I know. Is that like the 2D shooter? I don't think so. What's that vampire game? Vampire Survivors. Oh, maybe I do know this one. Is there another similar game that's also called something similar? Maybe I just know Vampire Survivors. Is the music volume still okay? I feel like I'm gonna OCD ask that. It's a reverse bullet hell. Blah blah blah. We got a fan of ants here for Leo. Would you call it a war, or just mad scrambling around? That's what I was trying to figure out, he said. In a war, you have strategy and tactics, like flanking. Can ants flank? I barely knew what he meant. Attacking from the side. Leo worried such terms loose from old books of lore, veil lore, as if pulling dragon's teeth. I almost said feet. Dragon's teeth from a fossil jaw. I suppose ants can flank, I said, though I sensed that it was a trick question, that Leo was flanking me with words at this very moment. Why not? By accident, of course they can. You look down on it from above and say, oh, that looked like flanking. But if there's no commander to see the field and direct their movements, can they really perform coordinated maneuvers? Probably one of the best $5 base games. Oh, is that how much it costs? That's a little like Sant Tonga's question, I pointed out. Can a sufficiently large field of cellular automata think? Automata? Well, can they? I've seen ants work together to carry off part of my lunch, so I know they can coordinate their actions. But if I'm one of 100 ants all pushing on the same raisin, I can feel the raisin moving, can't I? So the raisin itself is a way that they communicate with one another. But if I'm a lone ant on a battlefield, Thistlehead is Provener. Okay, he said, and turned his back on me and started walking. It was this penchant for dropping conversations in the middle, among other odd traits, that had earned him a reputation as being less than intact. He'd forgotten his sphere again. I picked it up and threw it at him. It bounced off the back of his head and flew straight up into the air. He held out a hand, barely looking, and caught it on the drop. I edged around the battlefield, not wanting to get combat ants, living or dead, on my feet, then hustled after him. Leo reached the corner of the cloister well ahead of me and ducked in front of a mass of slow-moving sewers in a way that was quite rude and yet so silly that the sewers all had a chuckle and thought no more of it. Then they clogged the archway, trapping me behind them. I had alerted Fra Leo so he wouldn't be late. Now I was going to arrive last and be frowned at. In a sense, the clock was the entire minster and its basement. The entire minster and its basement. When most people spoke of the clock, though, they meant its 4 dials, which were mounted high on the walls of the Praesidium, the minster's central tower. The dials had been crafted in different ages, and each showed the time in a different way. But all 4 were connected to the same internal works. Each proclaimed the time, the day of the week, the month, the phase of the moon, the year, and for those who knew how to read them, a lot of other cosmographical arcana. The Praesidium stood on 4 pillars, and for most of its height was square in cross-section. Not far above the dials, however, the corners of the square floor plan were cleaved off, making it into an octagon, and not far above that, the octagon became a 16-sided polygon, and above that it became round. The roof of the Praesidium was a disc, or rather, a lens, as it bulged up slightly in the middle to shed rainwater. It supported the megaliths, domes, penthouses, and turrets of the Starhenge, which drove and was driven by the same clockworks that ran the dials. Below each dial was a belfry? Screened behind tracery. Below the belfries, the tower flung out plunging arcs of stone called buttresses to steady itself. Those found footing amid the topmost spires of 4 outlying towers, shorter and squatter than the Praesidium. Oh my god, my book. But built to the same general plan. The towers were webbed to one another by systems of arches and spans of tracery that swallowed the lower half of the Praesidium and formed the broad plan of the minster. Book. Should I just take this out? It's like hanging literally by the last. No, I'll keep it in. I'll keep it. The minster had a ceiling of stone. Hey! Hey, Flair! 2 streams in a week, yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about maybe doing 2 or 3. And yes, are you familiar with this book, Jim Yo? Also good to see you here. Hello, hello. I just started. I'm like on chapter 1. The minster had a ceiling of stone, steeply vaulted. Above the vaults, a flat roof had been framed. Built upon that roof was the eyrie of the warden fendant. Its inner court, squared around the Praesidium, was roofed and walled and diced up into storerooms and headquarters. But its periphery was an open walkway on which the fendant's sentinels could pace a full circuit of the minster in a few minutes' time, seeing to the horizon in all directions, except where blocked by a buttress, pier, spire, or pinnacle. This ledge was supported by dozens of close-spaced braces that curved up and out from the walls below. The end of each brace served as a perch for a gargoyle keeping eternal vigil. Half of them, the fendant gargoyles, gazed outward. The other half, the regulant gargoyles, bent their scaly necks and aimed their pointy ears and slitted eyes into the constant spread below. Tucked between the braces and shaded below the sentinel's walkway were the squat Mathic arches of the warden regulant's windows. Few places in the consent could not be spied on from at least one of these, and of course, we knew them all by heart. Not familiar at all, okay. I've never heard of it. Oh, thank you. I thought, yeah, my overlay theme with my plants in the background got a theme: jungle, forest, nature going on. But yeah, I think this book is like pretty popular among like sci-fi nerds. I had looked up like a list of books that someone who loved Outer Wilds, the game, would like, and this was like one of the top recommendations. So that is why I'm here reading it. Knew them all by heart. The minster erupted from the planed-off stump of what had once been the end of a mountain range. The crag of the millenarian math loomed above it on the east. The other maths and compounds were spread below it on the south and west. The one where I lived, with the other tenors, was a quarter of a mile away. A roofed gallery, consisting of 7 staircases strung together by landings, connected our math to a stone patio spread before the portal that we used to get into the minster. This was the route being taken by most of my fellow tenors. Rather than wait for that clot of old sewers to clear the bottleneck, though, I doubled back into the chapter house, which was really just a wide spot in the gallery that surrounded the cloister. This had a back exit that got me into a covered alley between chalk halls and workshops. Its walls were lined with niches where we stuffed work in progress, ends and corners of half-written manuscripts projected, slowly yellowing and curling, making the passage seem even narrower than it was. Source code? Oh, I think I had wanted to see that. And then, yeah, years passed and I had never seen it. You loved it when it came out? What year did it come out? Jogging to its end and ducking through a keyhole arch, I came out into a meadow that spread below the elevated plinth on which the minster was built, and that served as a buffer separating us from the math of the centenarians. A stone wall 16 feet high sliced it in half. The hundreders used their side for raising livestock. When I had been collected, we had used our side as a haymow. A few years ago, in late summer, Fra Leo and Fra... This music is getting too loud. Too active. It's like calmer music. Tyler, no, you're not interrupting. I just need like a ambient, calm, space playlist. I need to find that for next time. When I had been collected, we had used our side as a haymow. A few years ago, in late summer, Fra Leo and Fra Jesfrey had been sent out with hoes to walk it, looking for plants of the 11, and indeed they had happened upon a patch of something that looked like Blythe. So they had chopped it out, piled it in the middle of the meadow, and set fire to it. By day's end, the entire meadow on our side of the wall had become an expanse of smoking, carbonized stubble, and noises coming over the top of the wall suggested that sparks had blown onto the hundreders' side. On our side, along the border between the meadow and the tangles, where we grew most of our food, the Fras and Surs had formed a battle line that ran all the way down to the river. We passed full buckets up the line and empty ones down it, and threw the water onto those tangles that seemed most likely to burst into flames. If you've ever seen a well-tended tangle in the late summer, you'll know why. The amount of biomass is huge, and by that time of the year, it's dry enough to burn. Sounds like California. Hey, broccoli! Your stream is working for me this time because I can stuck with shit. See, I think it's just random. I don't think. Hopefully we keep getting lucky with quality settings. Good to see you. Blah blah blah. Burn. At the Inquisition, the deputy warden regulant, who had been on duty at the time, had testified that the initial fire had produced so much smoke that he'd been unable to get a clear picture of what Leo and Jessary had done. So the whole thing had been chronicled as an accident, and the boys got off with penance. But I know, because Jessary told me later, that when the fire in the Blythe had first spread to the surrounding grass, Leo, instead of stamping it out, had proposed that they fight fire with fire and control it using fire vlor. Their attempt to set counterfires had only made matters worse. I have no idea what even a counterfire would be or mean. Jessary had dragged Leo to safety as he was attempting to set a counterfire to contain a system of counterfires that was supposed to be containing the original fire, but that had gotten out of hand. Having his hands full with Leo, he'd had to abandon his sphere, which to this day was stiff in one place and could never quite become transparent. Anyway, the fire had provided an excuse for us to finally do something we'd been talking about forever, namely, to plant it in clover and other flowering plants and keep bees. When there was an economy extramuros, we could sell the honey to burghers in the market stall before the day gate and use the money to buy things that were difficult to make inside the consent. When conditions outside were post-apocalyptic, we could eat it. As I jogged toward the minster, the stone wall was to my right. The tangles, now just as full and ripe as they'd been before the fire, were mostly behind me and to my left. In front of me and somewhat uphill were the 7 stairs, crowded with about. Compared to the other frauds all swathed in their bolts, half-naked Leo, moving twice as fast, was like an ant of the wrong color. The chancel, the heart of the minster, had an octagonal floor plan, as Theors were more apt to put it. It had the symmetry group of the 8th roots of unity. Its 8 walls were dense traceries, some of stone, others of carved wood. We called them screens, a word confusing to extramuros people, for whom a screen was something on which you'd watch a spiele or play a game. For us, a screen was a wall with lots of holes in it, a barrier through which you could see, hear, and smell. 4 great naves were flung out, north, east, south, west, from the base of the minster. If you have ever attended a wedding or a funeral in one of the Deolader's arcs, a nave would remind you of the big part where the guests sit, stand, kneel, flog themselves, roll on the floor, or whatever it is they do. The chancel, then, would correspond to the place where the priest stands at the altar. When you see the minster from a distance, it's the 4 naves that make it so broad at its base. Guests from extramuros, like Artisan Fleck, were allowed to come in the day gate and view aughts from the north nave when they were not especially contagious and, by and large, behaving themselves. This had been more or less the case for the last century and a half. If you visited our consent by coming in through the day gate, you'd be channeled into the portal in the north facade and walk up the center aisle of the north nave toward the screen at the end. You might be forgiven for thinking that the whole minster consisted of only that nave and the octagonal space on the other side of the screen. But someone in the east, west, or south nave would make the same mistake. The screens were made dark on the nave side and light on the chancel side, so that it was easy to see into the chancel but impossible to see beyond it, creating the illusion that each nave stood alone and owned the chancel. The east nave was empty and little used. We'd ask the older frauds and sirs why. They'd give a wave of the hand and explain that it was the minster's formal entrance. If so, it was so formal that no one knew what to do with it. At one time, a pipe organ had stood there, but this had been ripped out in the second sack, and later improvements of the discipline had banned all other musical instruments. When my crop had been younger, Orlo had strung us along for several years, telling us that there was talk of making it a sanctuary for 10,000-year Fraz, if the consent of Sant Edhar ever got round to building a math for such. A proposal was submitted to the millenarians 689 years ago, he'd say, and the response is expected in another 311. The south nave was reserved for the centenarians, who could reach it by strolling across their half of the meadow. It was much too big for them. We tenors, who had to cram ourselves into a much smaller space just next to it, had been annoyed by this fact for more than 3,000 years. The west nave had the best stained glass windows and the finest stone carving because it was used by the Unarians, who were by far the best endowed of all the maths. But there were easily enough of them to fill the place up, so we didn't resent their having so much space. There remained 4 screen walls of the chancel, northeast, southeast, southwest, and northwest, that were the same size and shape as the 4 that lay in the cardinal directions, but that were not connected to proper naves. On the dark sides of these screens lay the 4 corners of the minster, cluttered by structural works that were inconvenient for humans, but necessary for the whole thing to remain standing. Our corner, on the southwest, was by far the most crowded of these, since there were about 300 tenors. Our space had therefore been expanded by a couple of side towers that bulged out from the walls of the minster and accounted for its obvious asymmetry in that corner. The northwest corner connected to the primate's compound and was only used by him, his guests, the wardens, and other hierarchs, so there was no crowding there. The southeast corner was for the thousanders. It connected directly to their fantastical hand-carved stone staircase, which zoomed, veered, and rambled down the face of their crag. The northeastern corner, directly across from us, was reserved for the Aita. Their portal communicated directly with their covered slum, which filled the area between that side of the minster and the natural stone cliff that, in that zone, formed the convent's outer wall. A tunnel supposedly gave them access to the subterranean workings of the clock, which it was their duty to tend. But this, like most of our information concerning the Aita, was little better than folklore. So there were 8 ways into the minster, if one only counted the formal portals. But Mathic architecture was nothing if not complicated, and so there were also any number of smaller doors, rarely used and barely known about, except by inquisitive fids. I shuffled through the clover as quickly as I could without stepping on any bees. Even so, I made better time than those on the 7 stairs and soon reached the meadow door, which was set into a masonry arch that had been grafted onto the native rock. A flight of stone steps took me up to the level of the minster's main floor. I dodged through a series of odd, mean little storerooms where vestments and ceremonial objects were kept when out of season. Then I came out into that architectural hodgepodge in the southwest corner that we tenors used in place of a nave. Incoming fras and sirs obstructed me, but there were lanes of open space wherever the view was obstructed by a pillar. Planted in one of those lanes, right up against the base of a pillar, was our wardrobe. Most of its contents had been dumped out onto the floor. Fra Jessry and Fra Arcibald were standing nearby, already swathed in scarlet and looking irritated. Fra Leo was swimming through silk trying to find his favorite robe. I dropped to one knee and found something in my size among the ones that he had discarded. I threw it on, tied it, and made sure it wouldn't get in the way of my feet, then fell in behind Jessry and Arcibald. A moment later, Leo came up. Oh my god. Oh, okay. It ripped out. Finally. Hopefully the rest of my book stays intact. A moment later, Leo came up and stood too close behind me. We came up from the shadow of that pillar and threaded our way through the crowd toward the screen, following Jessry, who wasn't afraid to use his elbows. But it wasn't that crowded. Only about half of the tenors had shown up today. The rest were busy getting ready for Appert. Our Fras and Sours were seated before the southwest screen in tiered rows. Those in the front sat on the floor. The next row sat on their spheres, head-sized. Those behind them had made their spheres larger. In the back row, the spheres were taller than those who sat on them, stretched out like huge, filmy balloons, and the only thing that kept them from rolling about and spilling people onto the stone was that they were all packed in together between the walls, like eggs in a box. Grand Fra Mentaxenes pulled open the little door that penetrated our screen. He was very old, and we were pretty sure that doing this every day was the only thing that kept him alive. Each of us stepped into a tray of powdered rosin so that his feet could better grip the floor. Then we filed out and, like grains of sugar dropped in a mug of tea, dissolved in a vast space. Something about the way the chancel was built made it seem a cistern storing all of the light that had ever fallen upon the consent. Looking up from the standpoint, just inside the screen, one saw the vaulted minster ceiling almost 200 feet above, illuminated by light pouring in through stained glass windows in the clerestory all around. So much light shining down onto the bright inner surfaces of the 8 screens rendered them all opaque and made it seem as though the 4 of us had the whole minster to ourselves. The thousanders who had clambered down their walled and covered stair to attend Provenor were now seeing us through their screen, but they could not see Artisan Fleck with his yellow t-shirt and his Speely captor in the north nave. Likewise, Fleck could not see them. But both could view the Aught of Provenor, which would take place entirely within the chancel, and which would be indistinguishable from the same rite performed 1, 2, or 3,000 years ago. The Praesidium was supported by 4 fluted legs of stone that rammed down the middle of the chancel and, I imagined, through the underlying vault where the Aita looked after the movements of their bits. Moving inward, we passed by one of those pillars. These were not round in cross-section, but stretched out diagonally, almost as if they were fins on an old-fashioned rocket ship, though not nearly as slender as that implies. We thus came into the central well of the minster. Looking up from here, we could see twice as far up, all the way to the top of the Praesidium, where the Starhenge was. We took up our positions, marked by rosin-stained dimples. A door opened in the primate's screen, and out came a man in robes more complicated than ours, and purple to indicate he was a hierarch. Apparently the primate was busy today, so probably getting ready for Appert, and so he had sent one of his aides in his place. Other hierarchs filed out behind. Fra Delracones, the warden fendant, sat in his chair to the left of the primates, and Sor Tristanas, the warden regulant, sat to the right. 15 green-robed Fras and Sours, 3 each, of soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, and bass, trooped out from behind the screen of the Unarians. It was their turn to lead the singing and chanting, which probably meant we were in for a weak performance, even though they'd had almost a year to learn it. The hierarch spoke the opening words of the Aught and then threw the lever that engaged the Provenor movement. As the clock would tell you, if you knew how to read it, we were still in ordinal time for another 2 days. That is, there was no particular festival or holiday going on, and so the liturgy did not follow any special theme. Instead, it defaulted to a slow, spotty recapitulation of our history, reminding us how we'd come to know all that we knew. During the first half of the year, we would cover all that had gone before the reconstitution. From there, we would work our way forward. Today's liturgy was something to do with developments in finite group theorics that had taken place about 1,300 years ago, and that had caused their originator, Saint Blai, to be thrown back to his warden Regulant, and to live out the remainder of his days on top of a butt surrounded by slines who worshipped him as a god. He even inspired them to stop consuming Blythe, whereupon they became surly, killed him, and ate his liver out of a misconception that this was where he did his thinking. If you live in a consent, consult the chronicles for more concerning Sant Bly. If you don't, know that we have so many stories in this vein that one can attend Provenor every day for one's whole life and never hear one repeated. The 4 pillars of the Presidium I have mentioned, right in the middle, on the central axis of the whole minster, hung a chain with a weight at its end. It reached so high in the column of space above us that its upper reaches dissolved into dust and dimness. The weight was a blob of gray metal shot through with voids, as if it had been half-eaten by worms. A nickel-iron meteorite 4 billion years old, made of the same stuff as the heart of Arbor. During the almost 24 hours since the last celebration of Provenor, it had descended most of the way to the floor. We could almost reach up and touch it. It descended steadily most of the time, as it was responsible for driving the clock. At sunrise and sunset, though, when it had to supply the power for opening and closing the day gate, it dropped rapidly enough to make casual spectators scurry out of its way. There were 4 other weights on 4 other, independently moving chains. They were less conspicuous because they did not hang down in the middle, and they didn't move much. They rode on metal rails fixed to the 4 Presidium pillars. Each of these had a regular geometric shape: a cube, an octahedron, a dodecahedron, and an icosahedron. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. All wrought from black volcanic stone quarried from the cliffs of Ekba and dragged on sledge trains over the North Pole. Each rose a little bit every time the clock was wound. The cube descended once a year to open the year gate, and the octahedron every 10 years to open the decade gate. So both of these were now quite close to the tops of their respective tracks. The dodecahedron and the icosahedron. You know what? I nailed. Are you sure? I don't think so. I'm gonna look that last one up. What the heck is that last one? Icosahedron? Oh, icosahedron. Okay. I've never heard of that. It has 20 faces. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh, yes. A simpler way to put it. Icosahedron did the same for the Century and Millennium Gates, respectively. The former was about 9/10 of the way to the top, the latter about 7/10. So just from looking, you could guess it was about 3,689. Much higher in the Presidium, in the upper reaches of the chronochasm, the vast airy space behind the dials, where all of the clockwork came together, was a hermetically sealed stone chamber that contained a 6th weight, a sphere of gray metal that rode up and down on a jack screw. This kept the clock ticking while we were winding it. Other than that, it would only move if the meteorite was on the floor, that is, if we failed to celebrate the daily ought of Provenor. When this happened, the clock would disengage most of its machinery to conserve energy and would go into hibernation, driven by the slow descent of the sphere, until such times as it was wound again. This had only ever occurred during the 3 sacks, and on a few other occasions when everyone in the consent had been so sick that they had not been able to wind the clock. No one knew how long the clock would run in that mode, but it was thought to be on the order of 100 years. We knew it had continued to run all through the time following the 3rd sack, when the Thousanders had holed up on their crag, and the rest of the consent had been uninhabited for 7 decades. Hold on, I gotta have a sip. Wait, where was I? All of the chains ran up into the chronochasm where they hung from sprockets that turned on shafts, connected by gear trains and escapements that it was the Ida's business to clean and inspect. The main drive chain, the one that ran up the middle and supported the meteorite, was connected to a long system of gear trains and linkages that was artfully concealed in the pillars of the Praesidium as it made its way down into the vaulted cellar below our feet. The only part of this visible to non-Ita was a squat hub that rose up out of the center of the chancel floor, looking like a round altar. 4 horizontal poles projected like spokes from this hub at about the height of a person's shoulder. Each pole was about 8 feet long. At the proper moment in the service, Jessry, Archibald, Leo, and I each went to the end of a pole and put his hands on it. At a certain beat in the anathem, oh, that's the first time we see that word. At a certain beat in the anathem, each of us threw himself behind his pole, like a sailor trying to weigh anchor by turning a capstan. But nothing moved except for my right foot, which broke loose from the floor and skidded back for a few inches before finding purchase. Our combined strength could not overcome the static friction of all the bearings and gears between us and the sprocket hundreds of feet above, from which the chain and the weight depended. Once it became unstuck, we would be strong enough to keep it going. But keeping it unstuck required a mighty thrust, supposing we wanted to use brute force, or, if we chose to be clever, a tiny shake, a subtle vibration. Different praxics might solve this problem in different ways. At Sant Edhar, we did it with our voices. Back in very ancient times, when the marble columns of the halls of Orathena still rose from the black rock of Ekba, all the world's Theors would gather beneath the great dome just before noon. Their leader, at first, Adracones himself, later, Dyax or one of his other fids, would stand on the analemma, waiting for the shaft of light from the oculus to pass over him at midday, a climax celebrated by the singing of the anathem to our mother Hyleia, who had brought us the light of her father, Snowus. Snoos? I think it's Snowus. The odd had fallen into disuse when Orathena had been destroyed and the surviving Theors had embarked on the peregrination. But much later, when the Theors retreated to the Maths, Sant Cartus drew on it to anchor the liturgy that was then practiced all through the old Mathic age. Again it fell into disuse during the dispersal to the new Periclines and the Praxic age that followed. But then, after the terrible events and the reconstitution, it was revived again in a new form, centered on the winding of a clock. The Hylean anathem now existed in thousands of different versions, since every composer among the About was likely to take at least one crack at it during his or her lifetime. All versions used the same words and structure, but they were as various as clouds. The most ancient were monophonic, meaning each voice sang the same note. The one used at Sant Edhar was polyphonic, different voices singing different melodies that were woven together in a harmonious fashion. Those one-offs in their green robes sang only some of the parts. The rest of the voices came out through the screens. Traditionally, the Thousander sang the deepest notes. Rumor had it they developed special techniques to loosen their vocal cords, and I believed it, since no one in our math could sing tones as deep as the ones that rumbled out from their nave. The anathem started simple, then got almost too complicated for the ear to follow. When we'd had an organ, it had required 4 organists, each using both hands and both feet. In the ancient Ot, this part of the anathem represented the chaos of non-systematic thought that had preceded Snowus. The composer had realized it almost too well, since during this part of the music the ear could scarcely make sense of all the different voices. But then, sort of as when you are looking at some geometric shape that looks like a tangle having no order at all, And you rotate it just a tiny bit, and suddenly all its planes and vertices come into alignment, and you see what it is. All of those voices fell in together over the course of a few measures and collapsed into one pure tone that resonated in the light well of our clock and made everything vibrate in sympathy with it. Whether by a lucky accident or by feat of the praxics, the vibration was just enough to break the seal of static friction on the winding shaft. Leo, Archibald, Jessry, and I, even though we knew it was coming, practically fell forward as the hub went into motion. Moments later, after the backlash in the gear train had been taken up, the meteorite above our heads began to creep upwards, and we knew that 20 beats later we could expect to feel the day's accumulation of dust and bat droppings raining down on our heads from hundreds of feet above. In the ancient liturgy, this moment had represented the light dawning in the mind of Snowis. The singing now split apart into two competing strains, one representing Deat and the other Hyleia, the two daughters of Snowis. Trudging counterclockwise around the shaft, we worked up to a steady pace that fell into synchrony with the rhythm of the anthem. The meteorite began to rise at about 2 inches every second, and we would continue to do so until it reached its upper stop, which would take about 20 minutes. At the same time, the 4 sprocket wheels from which the 4 other chains were suspended were also turning, though much more slowly. The cube would rise by about a foot during this aught. The octahedron would rise by about an inch, and so on. And up above the ceiling, the sphere was slowly descending to keep the clock going during the time it took us to wind it. I should stipulate that it does not really take so much energy to run a clock, even a huge one, for 24 hours. Almost all of the energy that we were putting into the system went to run the add-ons, like bells, gates, the great orrery just inside the daygate, various lesser orreries, and the polar axes of the telescopes on the Starhenge. None of this was in the front of my mind while I was pushing my pole around and around the hub. True, I did look at these things afresh during the first few minutes, simply because I knew that Artisan Fleck was watching, and I was trying to imagine how I might explain these things to him, supposing he asked. But by the time we had found our rhythm, and my heart had begun to thump along at a steady pace, and the sweat had begun to drip from my nose, I had forgotten about Artisan Fleck. The chanting of the one-offs was better than I'd expected, not so bad as to call attention to itself. For a minute or two, I thought about the story of Saint Blai. After that, I thought mostly of myself and my situation in the world. I know that this was selfish of me, and not what I should have been doing during the aught. But unbidden and unwanted thoughts are the hardest to expel from one's mind. You might find it in poor taste that I tell you of what I was thinking. You might find it unnecessarily personal, perhaps even immoral, a bad example for other fids who might one day find this account sticking out of a niche. But it is part of this story. As I wound the clock on that day, I was wondering what it would be like to jump up to the Warden Fendant's ledge and jump off. If you find such a thing impossible to comprehend, you probably are not devout. The food that you eat is grown from crops whose genes partake of the all's well sequence, or even stronger stuff. Melancholy thoughts may never come into your mind at all. When they do, you have the power to dismiss them. I did not have that power, and was becoming weary of keeping company with those thoughts. One way to silence them forever would have been to walk out of the Disciplinarian Gate in a week's time, go to live with my birth family, supposing they would have me back, and eat what they ate. Another would have involved climbing the stair that spiraled up our corner of the minster. Are people starving to death, or are they sick because they are too fat? Artisan Quinn scratched his beard and thought about that one. You're talking of slimes, I assume? Fra Orlo shrugged. Quinn thought that was funny. Unlike Artisan Fleck, he was not afraid to laugh out loud. Sort of both at the same time, he finally admitted. Very good, said Fra Orlo in a now we're getting somewhere tone, and glanced at me to make sure I was getting it down. After the Fleck interview, I had had words with Frau Orlo. Pa, what are you doing with that 500-year-old questionnaire? It's crazy. It is an 800-year-old copy of an 1100-year-old questionnaire, he had corrected me. It would be one thing if you were a hundreder, but how could things have changed that much in only 10 years? Frau Orlo had told me that since the Reconstitution, there had been 48 instances in which radical change had occurred in a decade, and that 2 of these had culminated in sacks, so perhaps the sudden ones were the most important. And yet 10 years was a long enough span of time that people who lived extramuros, immersed in day-to-day goings-on, might be oblivious to change. So a tenor reading an 1100-year-old questionnaire to an artisan could perform a service to the society extramuros, assuming anyone out there was paying attention, which might help to explain why we were not only tolerated, but protected, except when we weren't, by the secular power. The man who looks at a mole on his brow every day when he shaves may not see that it is changing. The physician who sees it once a year may easily recognize it as cancer. Beautiful, I'd said. But you've never cared about the secular power before. So what's your real reason? You know, sometimes you're starving to death. I think I'm the opposite. Well, okay, I'm not fat, but sometimes this book is like low-key funny. Like after he compares looking at whatever, a mole on yourself, and then your doctor recognizes it as cancer because they don't see it every day like you do. He's like, beautiful. He had pretended to be bewildered by the question, but seeing I wasn't going to back off, he had shrugged and said, just a routine check for CDS. CDS? Casual domain shear. This had as much as proved that Orlo was only having me on. But sometimes he had a point when he was doing that. Correction, he always had a point. Sometimes I was able to see it. So I had rested my face on my hands and muttered, okay, open the floodgates. Well, a causal domain is just a collection of things linked by mutual cause and effect relationships. But isn't everything in the universe so linked? Depends on how their light cones are arranged. We can't affect things in our past. Some things are too far away to affect us in any way that matters. But still, you can't really draw hard and fast boundaries between causal domains. In general, no. But you are much more strongly webbed together with me by cause and effect than you are with an alien in a faraway galaxy. So, depending on what level of approximation you're willing to put up with, you could say that you and I belong together in one causal domain and the alien belongs in another. Okay, I had said. What level of approximation are you willing to put up with, Pa Orlo? Well, the whole point of living in a cloistered math is to reduce our causal linkages with the extramuros world to the minimum, isn't it? Socially, yes. Culturally, yes. Ecologically, even. But we use the same atmosphere. We hear their mobs driving by. On a pure theoric level, there is no causal separation at all. He hadn't seemed to have heard me. If there was another universe, altogether separate from ours, no causal linkages whatsoever between universes A and B, would time flow at the same rate between them? It's a meaningless question, I'd said, after having thought about it for a moment. That's funny. It seemed meaningful to me, he'd retorted, a little cross. Well, it depends on how you measure time. He'd waited. It depends on what time is, I'd said. I had spent a few minutes going up various avenues of explanation, only to find each of them a dead end. Well, I'd said finally, I guess I have to invoke the steelyard. In the absence of a good argument to the contrary, I have to choose the simplest answer. And the simplest answer is that time runs independently in Universe A and Universe B. Because they are separate causal domains. Yes. Orlo said, what if these 2 universes, each as big and as old and as complicated as ours, were entirely separate, except for a single photon that managed to travel somehow between them? Would that be enough to wrench A's time and B's time into perfect lockstep for all eternity? I had sighed, as I always did when one of Orlo's traps closed over me. Or, he'd said, is it possible to have a little bit of time slippage, sheer, between causal domains that are connected only loosely? So, back to your interview with Artisan Fleck. You want me to believe that you were just checking to see whether 1,000 years might have gone by on the other side of that wall, while only 10 have gone by on this side. I saw no harm in making inquiries, he'd said. Then he'd gotten a look as if something else was on the tip of his tongue, something mischievous. I had headed him off before he could say it. Oh, is this anything to do with your crazy stories about the wandering 10,000-year math? When we'd been new fids, Orlo had once claimed that he had found an instance in the chronicles where a gate somewhere had ground open and some Avout had walked out of it claiming to be 10,000ers celebrating Apert, which was ridiculous because Avout, in their current form, had only existed for, at that time, 3,682 years. So we'd reckoned that the whole purpose of the story had been to see if we had been paying any attention whatsoever to our history lessons. But perhaps the story had been meant to convey a deeper point. You can get a lot done in 10 millennia if you put your mind to it, Orlo had said. What if you found a way to sever all causal links to the world extramuros? That is utterly ridiculous. You are giving incantor-like powers to these people. But if one could do it, then one's math would become a separate universe, and its time would no longer be synchronized with the rest of the world's. Causal domain shear would become possible. Nice thought experiment, I'd said. Point taken. Thank you for the calca. But please tell me you don't really expect to see evidence of CDS when the gates open. It is what you don't expect, he'd said, that most needs. It is what you don't expect that needs most looking for. Do you have in your wigwams or tents or skyscrapers or wherever you live? Trailers without wheels mostly, said Artisan Quinn. Very well. In those, is it common to have things that can think, but that are not human? We did for a while, but they all stopped working and we threw them away. Can you read? And by that, I don't just mean interpreting logotype. No one uses that anymore, said Quinn. You're talking about the symbols on your underwear that tell you not to use bleach. That sort of thing. We don't have underwear or bleach, just the bolt, the cord, and the sphere, said Fra Orlo, patting the length of cloth thrown over his head, the rope knotted around his waist, and the sphere under his bottom. This was a weak joke at our expense to set Quinn at ease. Quinn stood up and tossed his long body in a way that made his jacket fly off. He was not a thick-built man, but he had muscles from working. He whirled the jacket round to his front and used his thumbs to thrust out a sheaf of tags sewn into the back of the collar. I could see the logo of a company, which I recognized from 10 years ago, though they had made it simpler. Below it was a grid of tiny pictures that moved. Kinograms. They obsoleted logotype. I felt old, a new feeling for me. Orlo had been curious until he'd seen the kinograms. Now he looked disappointed. Oh, he said in a mild and polite tone of voice, you are talking bullshit. I got embarrassed. Quinn was amazed. Then his face turned red. It looked as if he were talking to himself into being angry. Fra Orlo didn't say what you think, I told Quinn, and tried to punctuate it with a chuckle, which came out as a gasp. It is an ancient Orth word. It sounded a lot like I know, but Fra Orlo has forgotten all about the word you are thinking of. It's not what he meant. What did he mean, then? Fra Orlo was fascinated that Quinn and I were talking about him as if he weren't there. He means that there is no real distinction between kinograms and logotype. But there is, Quinn said. They are incompatible. His face wasn't red anymore. He drew breath and thought about it for a minute. Finally, he shrugged. But I see what you mean. I could have gone on using logotype. Why do you suppose it became obsolete then? Asked Orlo. So that the people who brought us kinograms could gain market share. Orlo frowned and considered this phrase. That sounds like bullshit, too. So that they could make money. Very well. And how did those people achieve that goal? By making it harder and harder to use logotype and easier to use kinograms. How annoying. Why did the people not rise up in rebellion? Over time, we were led to believe that kinograms really were better. So I guess you're right. It really is bull. But he stopped in mid-word. You can say it. It's not a bad word. Well, I won't say it because it feels wrong to say it here, in this place. As you wish, Artisan Quinn. Where were we? Quinn asked, then answered his own question. You were asking me if I could read, not these, but the frozen letters used to write Orth. He nodded at my leaf, which was growing dark with just that sort of script. Yes. I could if I had to, because my parents made me learn, but I don't, because I never have to, said Quinn. My son now, he's a different story. His father made him learn? Fra Orlo put in. Quinn smiled. Yes. He reads books all the time. His age? Obviously, this was not in the questionnaire. 11. And he hasn't been burned at the stake yet. Quinn said that in a very serious way. I wondered if Fra Orlo understood that Quinn was making a joke, taking a dig at him. Orlo made no sign. You have criminals? Of course. But the mere fact that Quinn responded in this way caused Orlo to jump to a new leaf of the questionnaire. How do you know? What? You say, of course, there are criminals. But if you look at a particular person, how do you know whether or not he is a criminal? Are criminals branded, tattooed, locked up? Who decides who is and isn't a criminal? Does a woman with shaved eyebrows say, you are a criminal, and ring a silver bell? Or is it rather a man in a wig who strikes a block of wood with a hammer? Do you thrust the accused through a donut-shaped magnet? Or use a forked stick that twitches when it is brought near evil? Does an emperor hand down the decision from his throne, written in vermilion ink and sealed with black wax? Or is it rather that the accused must walk barefoot across a griddle? Perhaps there is ubiquitous moving picture praxis, what you'd call spielecaptors, that know all, but their secrets may only be unlocked by a court of eunuchs, each of whom has memorized part of a long number. Or perhaps a mob shows up and throws rocks at the suspect until he's dead. I can't take you seriously, Quinn said. You've only been in the convent, 30 years? Fra Orlo sighed and looked at me. 29 years, 11 months, 3 weeks, 6 days. And it's plain to see you are boning up for Appert, but you can't really think that things have changed so much. Another look in my direction. Artisan Quinn, said Fra Orlo after a pause to make his words hit harder. This is Anno 3689 of the Reconstitution. That's what my calendar says, too. 3690 is tomorrow. Not only the Unarian math, but we Decenarians as well will celebrate Appert. According to the ancient rules, our gates will open. For 10 days, we shall be free to go out, and visitors such as you shall be welcome to come in. Now, 10 years hence, the Centenarian gate will open for the first, and probably the last time in my life. When it closes, which side of that gate will you be on? Quinn asked. I got embarrassed again, because I'd never dare ask such a question, but I was secretly delighted that Quinn had asked it for me. If I am found worthy, I should very much like to be on the inside of it, said Fra Orlo, and then glanced at me with an amused look, as if he had guessed my thoughts. The point is that in 9 or so years, I can expect to be summoned to the upper labyrinth, which separates my math from that of the centenarians, where I shall find my way to a grate in a dark room, and on the other side of that grate shall be one of those hundreders, unless they have all died, vanished, or turned into something else, who shall ask me questions that shall seem just as queer to me as mine do to you, for they must make preparations for their appert just as we do for ours. In their books, they have records of every judicial practice that they, and others in other consents, have heard of in the last 3,700 odd years. The list that I rattled off to you a minute ago is but a single paragraph from a book as thick as my arm. So even if you find it to be a ridiculous exercise, I should be most grateful if you'd simply describe to me how you choose your criminals. Will my answer be entered in that book? If it is a new answer, yes. Well, we still have magistrate doctors who roam about at the new moon in sealed purple boxes. Yes, those I remember. But they weren't coming around as often as we needed them. The powers that be weren't doing a good job of protecting them, and some got rolled down hills. Then the powers that be put up more Speely captors. Fra Orlo jumped to a new leaf. Who has access to those? We don't know. Orlo began moving to yet another new leaf. But before he found it, Quinn continued. But if someone commits a bad enough crime, the powers that be clamp a thing on their spine that makes them sort of crippled for a while. Later it falls off and then they are normal again. Does it hurt? No. A new page. When you see someone wearing one of those devices, can you tell what crime they committed? Yes, it says right on it, in kinograms. Theft, assault, extortion? Sure, sedition. Quinn waited a long time before saying, I've never seen that. Heresy? That would probably be handled by the Warden of Heaven. Fra Orlo threw his hands up so high that his bolt fell away from his head and even bared one of his armpits. Then he brought them down again, the better to clamp them over his face. It was a sarcastic gesture that he liked to make in a chalk hall when a fit was being impossibly blockheaded. Quinn clearly took its meaning and became embarrassed. Oh my god, pages be falling out of my book. And became embarrassed. He shifted back in his chair and pointed his chin at the ceiling, then lowered it again and looked at the window he was supposed to be mending. But there was something in Fra Orlo's huge gesture that was funny and gave Quinn the feeling that it was okay. All right, Quinn finally said. I never thought of it like this, but now that you mention it, we have 3 systems. The chaps in the purple boxes, the spine clamps, and this new thing that neither I nor Fra Erasmus has ever heard of, called the Warden of Heaven, said Fra Orlo, and began pushing through many leaves of his questionnaire, digging deep. Something had occurred to Artisan Quinn. I never mentioned them because I thought you'd know all about them. Because, Fra Orlo said, finding the page he'd been looking for and scanning it, they claimed that they came from the Consent, bringing the enlightenment of the mathic world to a worthy few. Yeah, didn't they? No, they didn't. Seeing just how taken aback Quinn was, Orlo continued. This sort of thing happens every few hundred years. Some charlatan will appear and make a claim on secular power based on the association with the mathic world, which happens to be fraudulent. I knew the answer to the following question before I blurted it out. Does Artisan Fleck, is he a follower, a disciple of the Warden of Heaven? Quinn and Orlo both looked at me, agog for different reasons. Yes, Quinn said. He listens to their casts while he works. That's why he made a Speely of Provenor, I said, because this Warden of Heaven claims to be part of us. If there's anything mysterious or, well, magnificent about this place, why, that just makes the Warden of Heaven seem that much bigger and more powerful. And to the extent that Artisan Fleck is a disciple of the Warden of Heaven, he feels some of that belongs to him. I'm gonna take a little sip. Orlo said nothing, which made me embarrassed at the time. The carbonation. When I thought about it later, though, I understood that he didn't need to say anything because what I'd said was obviously true. Quinn was looking a little confused. Fleck didn't make a Speely. I beg your pardon, I said. Fra Orlo was still distracted, thinking about the Warden of Heaven. They wouldn't allow it. His Speely captor was too good, Quinn explained. Being old and wise, Fra Orlo went rigid, pursed his lips and looked uneasy. Being neither, I said, "What on earth does that mean?" Fra Orlo's hand came down on my wrist and prevented me from writing any more, and I suspect that his other hand wanted to clamp down on Quinn's mouth. Quinn went on. "The eagle res, the steady hand, the dyna zoom, put those all together, and it could have seen straight across into the other parts of your minster, even through the screens, or at least that's what he was told by the artisan Quinn," Fra Orlo trumpeted, loud enough to draw looks from everyone else in the library. Then he made his voice quite low. "I am afraid you are about to tell us something that your friend Fleck learned from talking to the Aita, and I must remind you that such a thing is not allowed under our discipline." "Sorry," Quinn said. "It's confusing." "I know it is." "All right. Forget about the Spielecaptor. I'm sorry. Where were we?" "We were talking about the Warden of Heaven," Fra Orlo said, relaxing a little and finally letting go of my wrist. "And as far as I'm concerned, the only thing we need to establish is whether he is a throwback turned mystagogue or a bottle shaker, as the former can be quite dangerous." "I can puzzle out throwback turned mystagogue," I told Fra Orlo later. I was chopping carrots in the refectory kitchen, and he was eating them. "And I can even guess why they are dangerous, because they're angry. They want to come back to the place that anathematized them, and even the score. Yes. And that's why Quinn and I spent the whole afternoon with the Warden Fendant. But what's a bottle shaker? Imagine a witch doctor in a society that doesn't know how to make glass. A bottle washes up on the shore. It has amazing properties. He puts it on a stick and waves it around and convinces his fellows that he has got some of those amazing properties himself. So bottle shakers aren't dangerous? No, too easily impressed. What of the slines who ate Saint Blais's liver? Apparently they weren't so impressed." To hide a smile, Fra Orlo pretended to inspect a potato. "The point is well taken, but remember that Saint Blais was living alone on a butt. The very fact of his having been thrown back separated him from the artifacts and arts that are most impressive to bottle shaker producing societies." "So what did you and the Warden Fendant decide?" Fra Orlo glanced around in a way that made it obvious I should have been more discreet. "Expect more precautions at Appert." I lowered my voice. "So the secular power will send, I don't know, robots with stun guns? Echelons of horse archers? Cylinders of sleeping gas?" "I guess so." That depends on to what extent the Warden of Heaven has become the same as the Pangendrums," Fra Orlo said. He liked to call the secular power the Pangendrums. "And that is very difficult for us to make out. Obviously, I can't make heads or tails of it. It is just the kind of thing for which the office of Warden Fendant was created, and I'm certain that Fra Del Racones is working the problem as we speak. Could it lead to, a sack? Local or general? I certainly don't think that this is going to culminate in number 4. Fra Del Racones would have heard rumblings from other wardens Fendant. Even a local sack is most improbable. I wouldn't be surprised to see a bit of roughhousing on 10th night, but that's why we prepare for Appert by moving all of the stuff we really care about to the labyrinths." "You said to Quinn that radical changes extramuros had twice culminated in sacks," I reminded him. Fra Orlo let a moment go by and said, "Yes." Then, before I could go on, he put on a merry Fra face that he used when he was trying to humor a chalk hall full of bored fids. "You're not actually worrying about number 4, are you?" I murdered a carrot and said Diax's rake 3 times under my breath. 3 sacks, General, in 3,700 years is not bad, he pointed out. The statistics of the secular world are far more alarming. "I was worrying about it a little bit," I said, "but that is not what I was going to ask before you went Kefidokles on me." Orlo said nothing. Perhaps because I was gripping a large knife. I was tired and testy. Earlier, I had punched in my sphere to make it a bushel basket and ventured into the tangles nearest the cloister, only to find that they'd already been stripped of produce. To find all the stuff we needed to make the stew, I'd had to cross the river and ransack some of the tangles between it and the wall. I snatched a hard-earned carrot and aimed it at the sky. "You have only taught me of the stars," I said. "History I have learned from others, mostly from Fra Corlandon. He probably told you that the sacks were our fault," said Orlo, using "our," I noted, in a very elastic way, to mean every avowed all the way back to Ma Cartus. Sometimes, when I was chatting with Thistlehead, he would reach out and give me a little push on the collarbone, or just like that I'd be flailing my arms, aware that one more push would topple me. It was Leo's charming way of letting me know that he had noticed I was standing in the wrong way, according to his books of Vale lore. I thought it nonsense, but my body always seemed to agree with Fra Leo because it would overreact. Once, in trying to recover my balance, I had pulled a muscle deep in my back that had hurt for 3 weeks. Fra Orlo's last sentence touched my mind in a similar way. And, in a similar way, I overreacted. My face flushed and my heart beat faster. It was just like the moment in a dialogue when Thelines had tricked his interlocutor into saying something stupid and is about to begin slicing him up like a carrot on a plank. "Each sack was followed by a reform, was it not?" I said. "Let us rake your sentence, and say that each sack led to changes in the maths that are still observed to this day." That Fra Orlo was now talking in this style confirmed that we were in dialogue. The other Fra stopped peeling potatoes and chopping herbs, and gathered round to watch me get planed. "All right, call them whatever you wish," I said, and then snorted because I knew I had left myself open. This was the equivalent of me falling on my arse after one little nudge from Fra Leo. I should never have brought up Kefedocles. That sounds so weird to me. I'm gonna look that up. I don't know the reader from this. Kefedocles. Kefedocles. There we go. That sounds better. I should have never brought up Kefedocles. I was going to pay for that. I couldn't stop myself from shooting a glance out the window. The kitchen faced south into an herb garden that filled most of the space between it and the closest of the tangles, the ones cultivated by the very oldest Fras and Seurs, so that they wouldn't have to walk very far to get their chores done. The roof on that side had a deep overhanging eave to prevent sun from shining in and making the kitchen even hotter than it already was. Sor Tulia and Sor Ala were sitting together in the shade of that eave, directly beneath the window, cutting up tires to make sandals. I didn't want Tulia to hear me get planed because I had a crush on her, and I didn't want Ala to hear it because she would enjoy it so much. Fortunately, they were explaining something to each other as usual and had no idea what was happening in here. "Call them whatever you wish? What a curious thing to say, Fid Erasmus," Orlo said. "Let me see. May I call them carrots or floor tiles?" Titters flew from all around, like sparrows flushed from a belfry. "No, Pa Orlo, it would not make sense to say that each sack was followed by a carrot." "Why not, Fid Erasmus?" "Because the word carrot has a meaning different from reform or change in the maths. So, because words have this remarkable property of possessing specific meanings, we must take care to use the correct ones. Is that a just statement of what you have said, or am I in error?" "It is correct, Pa Orlo." "Perhaps some of the others, who have learned so much from the new circle and the reformed old Fanians, have noted some error in this and would like to correct us." And, with the placid eye of a viper tasting the air, Fra Orlo looked around at the half-dozen Fids who had encircled us. No one moved. "Very well. No one here wishes to support the novel hypothesis of Saint-Proc. We may continue under the assumption that words mean things. What is the difference between saying that the sacks were followed by reforms and saying that they were followed by changes in the maths?" I suppose it has the connotation. I suppose it has to do with the connotations of the word reform, I said. For I had given up and was willing to let myself be planed, not because I liked it, but because it was so unusual for Fra Orlo to expose his views about anything other than stars and planets. Ah, perhaps you could elaborate on that, for I am not gifted with your faculty of words, Fid Erasmus, and would be chagrined if I failed to follow your argument. Very well, Pa Orlo. To say that there were changes seems like a more Diaxon phrasing, raked clean of subjective emotional judgments, whereas when we say reforms, it gives the feeling that something was wrong with how the maths were run before, and that we deserved to be sacked. The Panjandrums needed to come in and mend us. When you put it that way, Pa Orlo, and in that tone of voice, you seem to suggest that the changes that were made need not have been, that they were forced on us wrongly by the secular power. I stumbled over a few words because I was excited. I had glimpsed a way to corner Orlo. For those reforms, those changes, were as fundamental to the maths as going to Provenor every day, and he could hardly take a stand against them. But Fra Orlo only shook his head sadly, as if he could scarcely believe what thin gruel was being spooned out of us in the chalk halls. You need to review the Seculum of Sant Cardus. Avowed who spent a lot of time peering through telescopes were known for taking an eccentric approach to the study of history, and so I did not laugh at this. A few of the others exchanged smirks. Pa Orlo, I read it last year. What you read was probably selections from a translation into Middle Earth. Many of those translations were influenced by a sort of Europrokian mentality that took hold during the Old Mathic Age, not long before the rise of the mystagogues. Hold on. How much more is left of this chapter? Let's see. I have no idea how long the chapters are in this book. Oh, okay. We have like 10 pages. Avowed who have spent a lot of time peering through telescopes were known for taking an eccentric approach to the study of history, and so I did not laugh at this. A few of the others exchanged smirks. Pa Orlo, I read it last year. What you read was probably selections from a translation into Middle Earth. Many of those translations were influenced by a sort of Europrokian mentality that took hold during the Old Mathic Age, not long before the rise of the mystagogues. You giggle, but it is obvious once you begin to notice it. Certain bits of it they translate poorly because they are skittish about what it means. Then, when they get around to choosing selections, they leave those bits out because they're ashamed of them. Instead, you should go to the effort of reading Cardus in the original. It is not as difficult to follow Old Earth as some would have you believe. And when I do this, what shall I learn? That, in the very founding document of the Mathic world, Sant Cardus herself emphasizes that it is not an accommodation to the Seculum, but a kind of opposition to it, a counterbalance. A consent as fortress mentality, suggested one of the listeners, trying to bait Orlo. That is not a designation I love, said Orlo. But if I hold forth on that, the stew will never get made, and we'll soon have 295 hungry about calling for our heads. Suffice it to say, Fid Erasmus, that Sant Cardus would never have accepted the notion that the secular power can or should reform the maths. But she would have admitted that it does not have the power to wreak changes on us. Oh my god, what was that loud noise? I understand some planning took place in the kitchen. Believe me, it was not one for ink or even chalk. Fra Corlandon, the FAE, first among equals, of the Order of the New Circle, had sat down across the table from me. For the first 9 3/4 years of my time at the convent, he had ignored me, except in chalk halls, where he was obliged to pay attention. Lately he was acting as if we were friends. This was to be expected. With luck, 30 or 40 new Avout would be joining us at Appert. Even though they were not here yet, they seemed to surround us like ghosts, which made me seem older by contrast. Not long after, if things went according to the usual pattern, the bells would signal the aught of Eliger, and all the tenors would come together to watch me take a vow that would bind me to one order or another. 11 of my crop had been collected, brought straight into the math from Extramuros. The other 21 had joined the Unarian math first and spent at least a year under their discipline before graduating to the tenors. They tended to be a little older than us collects. All collection and most graduation happened during Appert. Though if a one-off showed exceptional promise, he or she could graduate early by passing through the labyrinth that connected the Unarian to the Decenarian math. But this had only happened 3 times while I'd been here. The full wiring diagram of how Avout came here from Extramuros and from small feeder maths in the region, and how they moved from one math to another, was complicated, and not really worth explaining. The upshot was that in order to maintain our nominal strength of 300, we tenors would need to take in about 40 new people at Appert. Some, we couldn't know how many, would be graduating from the Unarian math. The balance would be made up by collection, and by trolling through hospitals and shelters for abandoned newborns. Once that was all done, I'd be facing a choice. Fra Corlandon was sounding me out, perhaps even recruiting me, for the new circle. I had always been seen as a fid of Orlo and a few other adherents who assisted him in his theorics. They spent whole days together in tiny chalk halls, and when they came out, I would go in and see their handwriting all tangled together on the slates, snarled skeins of equations and diagrams of which I understood perhaps one symbol in 20. At this very moment, I was supposed to be working on a problem that Orlo had set for me. A photognomonic tablet bearing an image of St. Tancred's nebula, from which I was supposed to answer certain questions about the formation of heavy nuclei in the cores of stars. Definitely not a new circle kind of exercise. So why would the new circle take it into their heads now that I might choose them at Eliger? Orlo was an impressive theoretician. Theoretician? Fra Corlandon said. I regret that I haven't been souvened by him more. The flaw in this was obvious. Odds were that Corlandon was going to spend 60 or 70 more years in the same math with Orlo. If he really meant what he said, why didn't he simply pick up his stew bowl and walk across the refectory to Orlo's table? Fortunately, my mouth was full of bread, and so I did not subject Fra Corlandon to a withering blast of Thelinean analysis. Chewing my food gave me time to realize that he was just speaking polite nothings. Adherians never talked this way. Spending all my time around Adherians, I'd forgotten how to do it. I tried to unlimber those parts of my mind that were used for polite conversation. Probably a good thing to do anyway, on Appert Eve. I'm sure you could arrange to be souvened by Orlo if you sat down near him and said something wrong. Fra Corlandon chuckled at my joke. I'm afraid I don't know enough about the stars even to say something wrong. Well, today for once, he said something that wasn't about stars. That's what I heard. Who could have guessed that our cosmographer was an enthusiast for dead languages? This entire sentence went by me, a little like when you are eating a slice of canned fruit and suddenly it slides down your throat before you'd had a chance to chew it. Having finally got the hang of polite chit-chat, I returned the favor by chuckling at his remark. But before I could really think about what he was saying, I noticed Leo and Justry carrying their bowls to the kitchen. 2 other Fids stood, as though caught up in their wake, and I followed them. Following their glances, I noticed Grandsir Tamura standing by the exit with her arms folded. She reacted as if I had hit her with a spitball from across a crowded chalk hall, swiveling her head to strafe me with her eyes. I still had no idea what was going on, but I excused myself from Fra Corlandon and carried my bowl into the kitchen. 7 of the other Fids were there, hurriedly cleaning their bowls, but none of them knew any more than I did. A few minutes later, all 32 Fids and Grand Sir Tamura were together in Sant Grod's Chalk Hall, which was normally considered to hold 18. Shall we move over to Sant Venster where there's more room? Suggested Sir Alla. She was the self-appointed boss of the bell-ringing team, and of everyone else in range of her search-lighted eyes. Behind Alla's back, people like to say that. Of all the current crop of Fids, she was the most likely to end up being Warden Regulant. Grand Sir Tamura pretended not to hear. She had lived here 75 years, and well knew the sizes of the available halls. She must have chosen this one for a reason. Probably, I realized, because no one could hide ignorance or boredom when we were packed in so tightly. There wasn't room to make our spheres into stools, and so we kept them pilled up and tucked inside our bolts. I noticed that some of the sirs were standing even closer together than was strictly necessary, and sniffling into one another's shoulders. One of them was Tulia, whom I liked quite a bit. I was 18. Tulia was a bit younger. Lately I had dreamed of having a liaison with her once she had come of age. In general, I looked at her more often than was strictly necessary. Sometimes she looked back, but when I tried to meet her eye now, she pointedly looked away and fixed her red and swollen eyes on the big stained glass window above the slate. Since, A, it was dark outside, and B, the window depicted Sant Grod and his research assistants being beaten with rubber hoses in the dungeons of some Praxic Age spy bureau, and C, Tulia had already spent something like a quarter of her life in this room, I reckoned that inspecting the window wasn't really the point. Dense though I am, I finally put it together that this was the last time that our crop of 32 Fids would be gathered together as such in our lives. The girls with their preternatural ability for noticing such things were responding. The boys with our equally uncanny obtuseness were only affected inasmuch as the girls we fancied were crying. Grand Sir Tamura was not doing this to be sentimental, though. Our topic is the iconographies and their origins, she announced. If I am satisfied that you know enough and that you understand the importance of what you know, then you shall be free to roam about extramuros during the 10 days of Appert. Otherwise, you shall remain in the cloister for your own safety. Fid Erasmus. What are the iconographies, and why do we concern ourselves with them? Why had Grand Sir Tamura directed the first question at me? Probably because I'd been transcribing those interviews with Fra Orlo and had an advantage over the others. I decided to frame my answer accordingly. Well, the extras, the seculars, Tamura corrected me. The seculars know that we exist. They don't know quite what to make of us. The truth is too complicated for them to keep in their heads. Instead of the truth, they have simplified representations, caricatures of us. Those come and go, and have done since the days of Thelines. And if you stand back and look at them, you see certain patterns that recur again and again, like attractors in a chaotic system. Spare me the poetry, said Grand Sir Tamura with a roll of the eyes. There was a lot of tittering, and I had to force myself not to glance in Tulia's direction. I went on. Well, long ago those patterns were identified and written down in a systematic way by a Vaut who make a study of extramuros. They are called iconographies. They are important because if we know which iconography a given secular, is carrying around in his head, we'll have a good idea of what they think of us and how they might react to us. Grand Sir Tamura gave no sign of whether she liked my answer or not. But she turned her eyes away from me, which was the most I could hope for. Fid Ostaban, she said, staring now at a 21-year-old Fra with a ragged beard. What is the Temnestrian iconography? It is the oldest, he began. I didn't ask how old it was. It's from an ancient comedy, he tried. I didn't ask where it was from. The Temnestrian iconography, he re-began. I know what it's called. What is it? It depicts us as clowns, Fra Osterbon said, a little brusquely, but clowns with a sinister aspect. It is a two-phase iconography. At the beginning, we are shown, say, prancing around with butterfly nets or looking at shapes in the clouds. Talking to spiders, someone put in. Then, when no reprimand came from Grand Sir Tamura, someone else said, reading books upside down. Another, putting our urine up in test tubes. So, at first it seems only comical, said Fra Osteban, regaining the floor. But then in the second phase, a dark side is shown. An impressionable youngster is seduced, a responsible mother lured into insanity, a political leader led into decisions that are pure folly. It's a way of blaming the degeneracy of society on us, making us the original degenerates, said Grand Sir Tamura. Its origins? Fidulian. The Cloud Weaver, a satirical play by the Etherin playwright Temnestra that mocks Thelines by name, and that was used as evidence in his trial. How to know if someone you meet is a subscriber to this iconography? Fid Ulf. Probably they will be civil as long as the conversation is limited to what they understand, but they'll become strangely hostile if we begin speaking of abstractions. Abstractions? Well, let's say something that comes to us from our mother Hyleia. Level of dangerousness on a scale of 1 to 10. Given what happened to Thelines, I'd say 10. Grand Sir Tamura didn't favor the answer. I can't be too hard on you for overestimating the risk, but Thelines was executed in an orderly judicial proceeding by the secular power, not a mob action, volunteered Leo, and mob actions are less predictable, thus more difficult to defend against. Very good, said Grand Sir Tamura, obviously surprised to hear such a cogent answer coming from Leo. So let us rate its level of danger as 8. Fid Halak, what is the origin of the Dachshund iconography? A Praxic Age moving picture serial, an adventure drama about a military spaceship sent to a remote part of the galaxy to prevent hostile aliens from establishing hegemony and marooned when their hyperdrive is damaged in an ambush. The captain of the ship was passionate, a hothead. His second in command was Dox, a theoretician, brilliant but unemotional and cold. Fit Jessery, what does the Dachshund iconography say of us? That we are useful to the secular power. Our gifts are to be celebrated, but we are blinded or crippled, take your pick, by the same qualities that make us useful, said Fit Tulia, which was why I couldn't get her out of my mind. In a heartbeat, she could go from blubbering to being the cleverest person in the room. How to identify one who is under the influence of the Dachshund iconography? Fitulia again. They'll be curious about our knowledge, impressed by us, but patronizing, certain that we must be subordinated but to intuitive, common-sense leaders. Danger level? Fid branch. I would put it very low. It is basically the situation we are living in anyway. This got a laugh, which Grand Sir Tamura didn't like very much. Fid Allah. What does the Yoran iconography have in common with the Dachshund? Sir Allah had to think for a minute before trying. Also from a Praxic Age entertainment serial? But it was an illustrated book, wasn't it? Later they made moving pictures of it, put in Fra Leo. Someone muttered a hint into Allah's ear, and then she remembered everything. Yes, Yor is identified as a theoretician, but if you see how he actually spends his time, he's really more of a Praxic. He has turned green from working with chemicals, and he has a tentacle sprouting from the back of his skull. Always wears a white laboratory smock. Criminally insane. Always has a scheme to take over the world. Fra Arcibald, what iconography surrounds the Retors? He was so ready. Fiendishly gifted at twisting words and confusing seculars, or, what is worse, influencing them in ways so subtle they don't even know it's happening. They use Unarian maths to recruit and groom minions, whom they send out into the secular world to get influential positions as burghers, but in truth, they are all puppets of a Retor conspiracy. Well, that one makes sense, anyway, said Fidulf. Everyone looked at him to make out whether he was joking. He looked taken aback. Guess we know which order you'll be signing up for, said one irritated Sor, who everyone knew was headed for the new circle. Because he's a Protean hater? Or just because he's socially inept, said one of her companions in a low voice that was, however, clearly audible. That's enough, said Grand Sword Tamura. The seculars don't know about the differences between our orders, and so all of us, not just the Proteans, are equally vulnerable to the iconography that Fra Archibald has just explained. Let's move on. And so it went. The Munko Strand iconography, eccentric, lovable, disheveled theorician, absent-minded, means well. The Pendarthan, frauds as high-strung, nervous, meddling know-it-alls who simply don't understand the realities. Lacking physical courage, they always lose out to more masculine seculars. The Cleven iconography. Theor as an awesomely wise elder statesman who can solve all the problems of the secular world. The Bodden iconography. We are grossly cynical frauds living in luxury at the expense of the common man. The Panthabrian. We are guardians of ancient mystical secrets of the universe handed down to us by Snows himself. Is that someone's doing like construction? Panthabrian, we are guardians of ancient mystical secrets of the universe handed down to us by Snows himself, and all of our talk about theorics is just a smokescreen to hide our true power from the unwashed multitude. In all, there were around a dozen iconographies that Grand Tamura wanted to talk about. I'd heard of all of them, but I hadn't realized that there were so many until she made us sort through them one by one. Particularly interesting was the rating of their relative dangers. After much back and forth, we concluded that the most dangerous of the lot was not the Yoran, as one might have expected, but rather the Moshianic, which was a hybrid of the Claven and the Panthabrian. It held that we were going to emerge from the gates and bring enlightenment to the world and usher in a new age. It tended to peak every 100 or 1,000 years as people got ready for the centenarian or millenarian gates to open. It was dangerous because it raised people's expectations to the point of delirium and drew many pilgrims and much attention. Because of my work with Fra Orlo, I knew that the Moshianic iconography was ascendant, in the guise of the so-called Warden of Heaven. Our hierarchs had become aware of this, and the Warden Fenton had asked Grand Sword Tamura to lead us in this discussion. In the end, she gave the whole crop permission to go extramuros during Appert, which surprised no one. The threat of locking us up had only been to make us pay heed. The discussion had actually become quite interesting, and the only thing that ended it was the ringing of the curfew bell. It was part of our discipline never to sleep 2 nights in a row in the same cell. Assignments were posted each evening on a slate in the refectory. We had to go back there to find out where we'd be sleeping and whom we'd be chumming with. So the entire group made its way out of the chalk hall and around the cloister, chattering and laughing about Dox and Yor and the other funny characters that the extras had dreamed up in an effort to make sense of us. Older Fras and Suras sat on the benches that faced into the cloister, assembling sandals, normally our sort of job, and giving us dirty looks. It was important that I not let any one of the sandal makers catch my eye, so I looked elsewhere. I noticed Fra Orlo emerging from one of the other chalk halls with a sheaf of leaves, cluttered with calculations, tucked under his arm. He started one way, then, seeing our crowd, turned into the garden instead, and headed off in the direction of the minster. This gave me a little twinge, for a certain tablet of St. Tancred's Nebula was gathering dust on a table in a workroom up in the Starhenge, holding down a couple of leaves stained with inconclusive notes and scratch-outs in my writing. Orlo would notice, and know I hadn't worked on it in days. A few minutes later, I was in the cell that I was to share that night with 2 other Fras, wrapping myself up in my bolt and making my sphere a pillow. You might expect that, as I lay there trying to get to sleep, I'd be thinking about Appert or about the iconographies, but Spying Fra Orlo in the cloister had put me in mind of the slippery sentence that Fra Corlandin had spoken at dinner, and that I'd swallowed without tasting. Now it had become one of those unwelcome thoughts I didn't know how to get rid of. That's what I heard, Fra Corlandin had said, but my dialogue with Orlo had taken place only an hour before dinner. Who among the spectators had run off to spread the story in the New Circled chapter house? Why did anyone care? Until last year, Corlandin had been in a liaison with Sir Tristanas, also of the New Circle. Then one day the bells had rung to signal the aught of regret, meaning that someone had made the decision to go into retirement. We had convened in the minster, and the primate had called out a name, that of our warden regulant. Despite all of the penance that this man had meted out to us over the years, we all felt sorrow as we sang the chants of the aught, for he'd been reasonable and wise. Statho, the primate, had then named Sir Tristanus the new warden regulant. It was a little bit of a surprise, because she was young, but not controversial, since everyone knew she was bright. She'd moved to the primate's compound, where she now had a cell to herself, and took her meals with the other hierarchs. But rumor had it that her liaison with Fra Corlandin continued. Some of a suspicious mindset, believed that the hierarchs had devices salted around this consent that enabled them to know what we were saying. Believing so was a fad that came and went depending on what people thought of the hierarchs at a given time. It had been on the rise since Sir Tristanus had been appointed warden regulant. It was impossible for me not to think of it now. Perhaps she had listened to my dialogue with Orlo, and then passed it on to Corlandin. On the other hand, said the part of my mind that pleaded with such thoughts to go away, I had to admit that I myself had thought it strange that Orlo would suddenly take an interest in old Orth translation errors. Who could have guessed that our cosmographer was an enthusiast for dead languages? Well, enthusiast was one of those unkillable words that had passed almost unchanged from Proto-Orth all the way up into Flukish. In Flukish, which was how I assumed at first Corlandin had used it, it simply meant one who liked something. The Proto-Orth meaning, however, was not a very complimentary one to hang on a fra, especially a theorician like Orlo. And dead languages, too, was an interesting choice of words. Was it really dead if Orlo was reading it? And if Orlo was right about the translations, then by calling the original dead, wasn't Corlandin sort of making a point? And doing it in a sneaky way, without going to the effort of proving it. After what seemed like hours of lying awake and worrying about this, I had the upside that the things Fra Orlo said, even when they caused me embarrassment or outright pain, never made me wrestle with my bolt in the night time in the way that these words from Fra Corlandin had. This made me think I'd rather join the Adherians. If, that is, the Adherians would have me. I was not so confident that they would. I'd never been so quick to grasp pure theorics as some of the other Fids. This must have been noticed, I wondered. Why had Granzer Timur asked me the first and easiest question? Was it because she didn't think I could handle anything more difficult? Why did Orlo have me working as an amanuensis instead of doing theorics? Why was Corlandin now trying to recruit me? Putting it all together, I came to the conclusion that everyone knew I just wasn't fit to join the Adherian order, and some were trying to prepare a soft landing for me. And that is part 1 of Anathem. And my throat is very dry. I'm probably gonna save part 2 and beyond for the next reading stream. I don't know if I should like cut it up into smaller sections. Hold on, just put my little bookmark. And I need to glue these. You hate all the characters? Heading out to go hit a pride event. Alright, have fun. Thanks for hanging out. I think I'll be stopping that here. I mean, yeah, the characters are all pretty sassy, I'd say. The way they speak to each other. Maybe it's because they are in a sheltered part of their society. I don't know. I like Fra Leo. He seems the most down to earth. Um, let's see who is on. I don't really have friends that are on. Maybe what Stuck Up? Yeah, definitely Stuck Up. Um, all right. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed my first reading stream, my second stream back recently. And I will try to find a cooler, more fitting music playlist, or maybe like some ambient sounds. Although I was thinking like space, because I mean there is like space themes, but I guess in the setting of this it's like seems like more medieval. Funny. Far Cry. I played, what was the most recent one? Far Cry 6. The one with Giancarlo Gustavo Fring. I played it quite a bit and it wasn't as fun as Far Cry 5. The one I played on stream. So I don't know if I'd play that, but I have a bunch of things that I've started to play. Well, World of Warcraft, need to still get into that. And before earlier this year, I was playing Monster Hunter Wilds. I still have more to play of that. What else? Oh, and then I started Subnautica too, but I barely played any of that. That one's in early access and was pretty good. I don't know if you guys have seen Mecha. I don't know how I've heard the pronunciation now. I forgot. Mecha Chameleon that everyone's been playing. Hey Alvaro. That's those streams are Fortnite. Yeah, I haven't played Fortnite in years. I wonder if it's still similar or if it's different now. What else have I? Oh, I had some puzzle games that I bought earlier this year, and I played a few of them. I don't know if anyone is familiar with Myst or Riven, but those were remastered and I played them. Those are really good. And the next one I was gonna play was the Talos Principle, which is also a remaster of the original. I started that, and I thought that could be a cozy one to play on stream sometime. Yeah, he did. He ended like 3 hours ago, I think. Let's go with Pokemon. What? Partidas? Wow, I have to watch gameplay of that. That doesn't sound like Fortnite. But yeah, I'm gonna head out, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your Saturdays. Today's Saturday, right? Of your Saturday. And I will see you again maybe on Tuesday, like last time. Tuesday, and I'm not sure what I'll be streaming yet. More, I want to do at least a little bit of reading every stream just so I can get through the book, you know, relatively, not quickly, but you know, just to make progress in the story, because I want to know what's gonna happen, or you know, what's the conflict, what's the problem that's gonna happen. But yeah, I hope you guys have a good night, and I'll see you next time. I don't think there's anyone to raid today, so I'm just gonna end it here. Bye bye. Have a good night. Bye bye. Good night.